listener production.
Hey, welcome to this episode of The Briefing. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. Animals have been trained to do some amazing things to help out humans. Think seeing eye dogs or carrier pigeons. But there's another, often maligned critter that is doing life-saving and groundbreaking work in Africa. The rat. That's right, a not-for-profit based in Tanzania called Apopo has been using African giant pouched rats to sniff out landmines and even tuberculosis, and is now getting the critters to turn their noses to the illegal wildlife trade. Estimated to be worth $35 billion a year, the trade of things like ivory, rhino horns, pangolin scales and African blackwood is still rampant across the continent, and work is continuing to try to shut it down. So how big of a piece of the puzzle are these incredible rats in stopping it? And what else could they be used for in the future? Joining me now is one of the people who helped launch the program in Tanzania, Dr. Kate Webb. She's the US scientific advisor at Apopo. She's also a neuroscientist and an assistant professor in psychiatry and behavioural sciences at Duke University. Dr. Webb, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing today. Really excited to talk about this incredible initiative. Now, the rats at Apopo have been used for years to sniff out landmines and tuberculosis, which to me is amazing enough on its own. But tell me how they came to be trained to be used in detecting the illegal wildlife trade.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. As you mentioned, over the past 25 years, Apopo has been training these African giant pouched rats for scent detection tasks, including the landmine detection and detecting tuberculosis. And the rats are really ideal detection animals. They have an excellent sense of smell and they have a long average lifespan. And we were actually approached by a South African nonprofit, the Endangered Wildlife Trust, who had read about some of our work and thought that the rats could be potentially useful in the fight against the illegal wildlife trade. We thought that the rats potentially had a special set of skills that made them valuable members in this fight. And some of the key advantages of the rats are that they are easily transferable between trainers and have a relatively long lifespan, and they're also lightweight. So you can actually move them around quite easily, lift them up, and take them where the fight is.
So without obviously getting into the complete intricacies, because I'm sure it's quite complicated, but how do you actually train a rat to smell out something like a rhino horn?
So all of the rats are trained using positive reinforcement training. So the rats learn during the first stage of training, which is indication training, the rats learn to perform a specific behavior, which in the case of detecting a pangolin in this study was holding their nose over a hole with a pangolin sample for a set duration. It's usually about 3 to 4 seconds. And then they're rewarded with a tasty treat, typically peanut butter banana pellets. And then the next step is discrimination training. And this step is critical. And this is where other odors, other non-target odors, non-wildlife targets are introduced. And so the rats are learning to listen to their nose. They're learning that they're only reinforced when it's a wildlife target and not when it's a non-target item. So we increase the number of non-targets that they're exposed to, the different types, and the rats, again, learn to signal only when there's a wildlife target. One thing that was really interesting about the pangolin detection is that the rats need to know when to detect pangolin even when it's being hidden. So smugglers often use items to both visually conceal wildlife targets or poached wildlife, but also to conceal the odor. And so they use really smelly things like washing powder or candy. And so the rats, in the end of this project, the rats were learning to reject nearly 150 non-wildlife items.
Wow, it's so impressive. And you were part of the team that helped launch this trial. It's not officially a program that's running, but I suppose it's a trial of a program that we'd hope to see continue. How successful has it been? What have some of your early results shown you?
Yeah, so in the paper that we recently published, this was a proof of principle study. So we did everything in a laboratory setting, very rigorous, controlled environment, and the rats performed exceptionally well. So we demonstrated already that they can detect pangolin, hardwood, rhino horn, and ivory, even when it's being hidden, and even when they don't encounter it for a long period of time, which is really important. The next steps of this project was really to test the kind of operational feasibility. And so we've been trialing rats in the seaport of Dar es Salaam. And in this in these trials, we're really trying to innovate and develop search strategies. How are the rats actually going to be able to do this in practice? One of the kind of developments in this area is actually training the rats on a different indication method. So in this case, rats have a little vest that has a small ball attached to it. And the rats learn when they detect a wildlife target, they can pull this little ball with their front paws, which sets out a little beeping noise and notifies the trainers that they have found a wildlife target. And this could be really useful in instances where they're going into a shipping container or they're somewhere where their handler can't necessarily see them, but we need to know that they found a target item. And some other examples of that are having the rats learn how to effectively walk on a long leash so they can go into the shipping container or evaluate and kind of, we're continuing to develop the search strategies. I'll say the first trials that we did, the rats found 83% of the wildlife targets. They just completed another trial in which at least one rat discovered it was 93%. So we're increasing our sensitivity to be able to identify these targets.
Yeah, that's absolutely impressive. I guess the next question then is, are these rats that you're using for this program special in any way, or can any rat be trained to be a super sniffer?
Absolutely. That's a great question. These are not the typical rats that you might be thinking about. So these are very large rats. Some of the rats, maybe when they're younger, could fit on my shoulder, but certainly when they're older, they'd be too big for even that. One of the most important features of these rats is their long life. So it takes about 9 months to train a rat for one of our operations, but these rats on average can live up to 11 years. And so they have a very long working lifespan, similar to almost what you might find with a dog. And so that makes them quite unique. Another thing that makes them quite unique is that they are native to sub-Saharan Africa, where Popo predominantly works. And so this means that the rats are readily available. We have a breeding colony. They're not vulnerable to high heat, high humidity, or any of the conditions that we work in.
Yeah, that's such an important consideration as well. How vital is the work that these rats are doing now, including their work sniffing out landmines and tuberculosis?
Certainly, I think the landmine detection has been remarkably successful. We've given land back to folks who haven't been able to work on that land for a really long time. In terms of tuberculosis, we've increased the average detection of individual clinics by over 40%. And so I think those programs have been so remarkably successful that we're really optimistic about the wildlife detection. The illegal wildlife trade is a massive problem, and particularly with the wildlife species that we're training the rats on, I think we could have a remarkable impact. Pangolins, for example, I think don't necessarily always come to mind when you think about illegally smuggled wildlife, but they're actually the world's most heavily trafficked mammal. They're trafficked for meat and scales, and more than 1 million pangolins actually were trafficked between 2000 and 2019. So this is a huge problem. In terms of elephant and rhino, I think we all probably have heard a little bit about ivory and rhino horn being poached, but there's an estimate of, it was, I think, between 2005 and 2014, that there was like a 30% decline in African elephant numbers. And certainly there's been at least, I think it was 11,000 rhinos between 2007 and 2014 as well. So this is a huge problem. Another big problem that I think also a lot of folks don't know about is that the illegal wildlife trade is actually closely related to other illegal global crime economies. So the folks that are involved in smuggling and poaching animals are often involved in human, drug, and arms trafficking as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they're doing quite a bit of good, these rats. And I guess that brings me to my next question is, we were talking before we hit record and I said, a lot of people that I was talking to about this story, because I've been really excited to cover this story, were kind of going, ew, rats. Do you think that this could also maybe help, and this is far less important, but could potentially help rat PR across the globe? Because this is such amazing work that they're doing. We look at dogs in that way because of their seeing eye dogs and they can detect things same as these rats can. Will this be good for rat PR?
Absolutely. I hope so. These rats are incredible. And I think that, of course, there's an added benefit that when they're wearing their cute vest, there's something about trusting, an animal working in a vest. But certainly these rats are really interesting to work with. And I think a lot of folks are surprised to hear that these rats have pretty distinct personalities. So when I was working with the rats on a day-to-day basis, I knew who I was working with because of how they interacted with me and their personalities. We also named the rats. So the rats in this study were named after conservationists. They were named after advocates for wildlife. And so we had, David Attenborough and Steve Irwin and Teddy Roosevelt. And I think that encouraging folks to see rats in a slightly different light is really important. And the Apopo rats are great ambassadors for rats worldwide.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we let you go, Dr. Webb, what's the future of this program, and are there plans to train these sort of rats to sniff out anything else in the future?
We are continuing to work in kind of trialing the search strategies. So I mentioned that we just finished up the trials at the seaport in Dar es Salaam, but there are plans to trial in the airport, which will take on a whole different kind of needs in terms of search strategies. There's been some great interest in the rats due to their cost advantage in particular. So we've had some interest in ports in Singapore and in France. And certainly the Tanzanian Wildlife Management Authority is interested in continuing and working together. So I'm really hopeful that, we might see rats deployed in the next couple of years in seaports around the world.
And as well, before we let you go, you can sponsor these rats, I believe. What's the best place for someone to look that up if they want to help out?
Yeah, absolutely. You can adopt a rat online at apopo.org, and you can receive updates on all of the rat successes.
Excellent. Dr. Kate Webb, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
That was Dr. Kate Webb, the US scientific advisor at Apopo and an assistant professor in psychiatry and behavioural sciences at Duke University. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That is all for now. A reminder, we put out full eps of our weekend briefing chats on YouTube. You can search Listener Newsroom to see them. And don't forget to catch up with our other video content on TikTok at Listener Newsroom. We're also on Instagram, which is at The Briefing Podcast. And if you liked this ep, we'd love it if you could share it with someone you think might enjoy it too. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. See you tomorrow morning at 6.